Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Presentation Night with me, your host. And man, you may have heard of this trend. You may have heard of this trend where you go find all of your loved ones, your friends, your family members, you capture them in a room, sometimes against their will, and you force them to watch an arbitrary presentation that you have created. And that is what we are doing right here. We have a presentation rating the Lord of the Rings swords and which one is my favorite. And you might notice here, there's a little white spot where it says buy, right? And that's because, my dear friends, for you, we are going to make this very presentation available, this PowerPoint available, so you can go capture all of your friends and family members and force them to watch this presentation, and you can give it the way that you would like to. So without further ado, let's get into it and show you how I would do this presentation, right? First thing, we got to talk about the ranking system so we know how this is all going on. Right, so we're going to rank the swords based off two things, right? Functionality, how useful would it be, right? It can get up to a score of 5, and then we go over the overall aesthetic. How nice does it look, right? So you can get a total score of 10 points using this system. Now, why are we starting? There's lots of swords out there, especially with all the different series and movies that there are. Why are we starting with Lord of the Rings? Okay, and the reason for that is Tolkien is the father of fantasy. He basically created the genre, and Peter Jackson. He took that series and basically brought it to life, right? Before Peter Jackson had done this, people thought that Lord of the Rings was unadaptable, and he actually took Lord of the Rings and turned it into the most profitable and most loved trilogies in cinema. All right, so great, right? That's why we're starting with this one, and they did a great job on everything. Even some of the basic stuff like props and stuff like that, and that's actually why we're able to look at some of these props and swords and rate them. So that's why we're starting with Lord of the Rings. All right, let's start with Aragorn's Ranger Sword. Functionality-wise, we have a pretty standard longsword, right? Has room for, it can be gripped one-handed, two-handed, has a nice cross guard, has a fuller running along the majority of the blade length that will reduce the weight a little bit. Functionality-wise, this will work as well as any longsword. Looks great. You can do all of your traditional HEMA stuff with it. Functionality, 5 out of 5. No problem. If you look at the aesthetics, man, it's a beautiful sword. If you look closer at the crosspiece as well, it has some shape to it, right? It's not just like one-dimensional. It's slightly upswept. It's more than just a square bar. Looks pretty good. And at the ends, it even has this little wire wrap on them, just like a little wire going around each side of the crosspiece. It has this ring that goes through the center of the grip. The grip's this like nice color. It's like this dark green that matches like Aragorn's Ranger aesthetic. If you look at the pommel, there's some shape to it. It's not just an average pear shape, and there's some extra detail to it that you might be able to make out. And again, they have this sort of like intricate little wire wrap that goes around the base of it there. So overall aesthetics, even though from a distance you might not be able to see it, man, there's a lot more that meets the eye on this. It matches Aragorn perfectly, and so yeah, this one gets 5 out of 5 on that. So that gives this sword a total 10 out of 10, and that is why this is my favorite sword. Oof. Moving on. Now, let's take a look at Aragorn's. This is his king sword when he comes into his kinghood. He's returning as the king. He gets this upgraded sword. In the books, it happens a little bit earlier, but we're not going to go into that. Now, as far as functionality, this is a slightly larger two-handed sword. So potentially even more appropriate to the battlefield. It's going to, have all of its normal functionality as a longsword. So a lot of the same points apply. Functionality is going to be a 5 out of 5. Overall aesthetic. Now, there are some additional things to point out here, right? You have these little hollow pieces in both the cross hilt and the pommel. And as far as I know, this might be the first time in cinema that you see a pommel with this sort of hollow piece in it. And that's notable. So they went above and beyond for this sword, and it looks incredible. I do also love, you have basically the leather part of the grip, which has some dimension to it. Has these little risers, which again looks good on the close-up, and then you have this like extended pommel, so you have part of the grip with metal, some part of it leather, and then you actually have some additional detail in that little hollow space there, which is great. You have writing that goes along the length of the blade. The overall aesthetic is incredible. This is a really iconic sword. They made it look really good. So again, 5 out of 5 for overall aesthetic, which brings this sword to a total 10 out of 10, and that is why this is my favorite sword. Moving on to Eomer's sword. Functionality-wise, you got a single one-handed sword. Now, you might notice that there's not a whole lot of hand protection, and this is very reminiscent to the migration era swords that the Vikings had, right? People call it a Viking sword. So very reminiscent of that. So just because there's not like a huge crossguard doesn't mean that this isn't perfectly functional. That's how a lot of migration era swords are. They don't have a lot of hand protection, and that's because you use it in conjunction with a shield, and that's totally fine. And if you look at what the Rohirrim have, is they typically have a sword and a shield. So again, that works out great for their culture. And so as far as functionality goes, this is totally acceptable. And it actually, if you look at the pommel, it does look very similar to what they got going on with a lot of Viking style swords. And you have a double fuller on here, which again is going to reduce weight. So as far as functionality is concerned, right, this is going to be a 5 out of 5. Now, one thing I love with the aesthetic, something that this trilogy does great, is you can take a piece of equipment, armor, sword, whatever it is, and you can look at it and you pretty much have a good idea of whose weapons these are, right? And with these swords that the Rohirrim use, is they have like some of these like horses, built into it, right? You see this theme on both the pommel, and also, I mean, I guess you would call it like the cross piece, but it's not really, right? On that guard up there that you have. So you really see this like overall theme that just looks incredible. Again, you have detailing on the wrap. You have like the grip portion, right? It's not just a standard leather covering. You have this like nice little wire thing. If you're going to get a real functional sword that had all these details on it, this would be a high end piece for sure, right? And it looks incredible, looks great. So overall aesthetic, 5 out of 5. Again, you look at this and you immediately know that this is, a nice status sword, and that this is a sword of Rohan. So totally functional, looks incredible, and that is why it gets a 10 out of 10, and that is why this is my favorite sword. Now let's move on to Theoden's sword. Right. And again, this is a one-handed sword, which again, for this group of people makes sense. If you're riding on horseback, you want to be able to have a sword that you can use one-handed, or if you're using a shield, you want to be able to use it one-handed. So that is why this makes total sense. Again, you have this horse theme there that looks great. You have risers there in the grip that give a good purchase. You have the double fuller. So again, a great sword for cut and thrust one-handed, being able to use it with a shield. No problem. Looks great there functionality wise. You're going to get five swords out of 5 there. Now, if we look at just, again, the overall aesthetic, you have those same themes. You have a lot of detail there on the end cap, on the pommel, as well as the guard there. And it just looks beautiful. Just looks beautiful. And again, just so you look at it and it's iconic. You immediately know, man, this is the sword of the king. And amazing. So again, that's why this is going to get a 10 out of 10. And that is why this is my favorite sword. Now, let's move on to Boromir's sword. All right. Now, functionality-wise, I really do like this piece, because this is probably the only sword that you see that's a true hand-and-a-half sword. So you have the grip, you have the leather grip, you have the extended pommel. So you're actually able to use this one-handed really easily. You're able to use it two-handed pretty comfortably, and that's what we actually see Boromir do. We see sometimes he's using it sword and shield, sometimes he's using it sword by himself. So this is a very versatile sword when it comes to functionality, which is great. This is actually, if you're going on an adventure, I would argue this is the best adventuring sword, right? For the context of going on an adventure, you want something that's, I think this would be the sword I would take, right? If I'm going on an adventure. And then functionality wise, again, because sometimes you're using it with a shield, sometimes you're using it without a shield, you are going to want to have more hand protection than what the swords of Rohan have. So you do have a little bit more of a cross guard there. And so that all lines up. You have a nice big fuller, which is going to reduce weight, make this very nimble, agile, fantastic functionality wise. Yeah, this is 5 swords out of 5 for sure when it comes to functionality. And then overall aesthetic, again, like look, you have this twisted upswept cross piece there. You have these like little wire wraps going around it. You have a little wire wrap going around the extended pommel. You have some detailing there, right? There's shapes. It just, it looks incredible, right? So it's gonna get a 5 out of 5, which means that this sword gets a 10 out of 10. And guys, this is why this is my favorite sword. Now, going over to the Nazgul sword. Functionality-wise, you're going to have a lot of stuff here that goes on with the same things we're talking about with longswords, okay? So you have a two-handed sword. It's going to work well as a longsword. You have a diamond cross-section, which means it's going to be a little bit stiffer. It's going to be great in the thrust. It's going to cut just fine. So functionality-wise, everything's looking there. Now, some people might look at the cross guard there and go, oh, no, it's a little jaggedy. That might hurt your hand if you're going against it. I actually have a replica version of this. And the way that those protrusions go out to the side, because the way they're facing, they don't actually rub your hands wrong at all. You can get a little bit better detail, like right here. You get to see this how they're kind of like pointing out, so they don't really affect your hands at all. Especially if you happen to be wearing gloves, you're not going to notice this at all. Which the Nazgul, that they are wearing gloves when they're wielding this. So as far as functionality wise, there's going to be no issues here. You're going to be able to use this no problem. The other thing I like about this is you have this little finger position right here where you can actually put your finger over the cross guard and give it a little bit more point control there, which I think is really nice. So functionality wise, you're not going to have any issues with this, right? This is going to work just as well as any other longsword out there. I love how you actually have this sort of like pointed pommel here, so you could actually do some damage, pommeling someone with that, right? So functionality wise, yeah, five swords out of 5. This will do some damage for sure. No issues there, right? It's totally functional. Now, overall aesthetic, right? You might look at this and be like, oh man, it kind of looks like it's run down or this or that and the other. But again, that perfectly serves the story where you identify a piece of weaponry, you immediately know who this is, right? This is a Nazgul sword, and the story behind it looks incredible. Like this looks like a sword that someone's had for a long time, right? And maybe there's a little bit of damage that happened here, and they had to file it down and reprofile the sword. It tells a story. It's great. It looks iconic. It fits the part perfectly. And so, this is for aesthetics. This is going to get a 5 out of 5, right? Which means this sword is going to have a 10 out of 10, which is why this is my favorite sword. Now let's take a look at the Witch King sword. This is the biggest sword piece, I think, in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So this is a true war sword, true battlefield sword, right? You could take this onto the battlefield, do a heck of a lot of damage with it. Functionality wise, you have a good solid space here for your hands. You probably have 3 hand lengths there for your hands. So you're going to be able to get some good solid leverage on that. Again, you have a diamond cross section, so no fullers there. Again, this is going to be very robust. It's going to cut just fine. It's going to be terrifying in the pierce, in the thrust. So it's going to do some damage for sure, right? This is a battlefield weapon. It can do some damage. Functionality, 5 out of 5, right? You could take this to the battlefield, right? You could pommel someone ferociously with that. You got like a little mace hanging on the back of your sword. So totally fine, right? And then again, aesthetic, so iconic. You look at it and you're like, yep, this is a bad guy sword. Okay, you immediately know who it belongs to. It's that iconic. You have the pommel matching perfectly, with the rest of the armor, right? It's very cohesive in that sense. And again, you have detailing. You have this great, fantastic detailing that's going on in the crossguard. It just all matches up so well. You have this nice ricasso area here. It looks fantastic, right? I love this sword. Absolutely love to have it. 10 out of 10, man. And that's why this is my favorite sword, guys. Come on. How can you not love it? All right. Let's take a look at the dwarf swords. The swords of the dwarfs, which and this is a fun fact about why we're spelling it with an F, because you have this hilarious. If you go back and research this, some of his editors were telling Tolkien that he needed to spell dwarves with an F, and he was like, no, because that's not how it happens with elf. And so he actually had some fun back and forth with that. Anyways, so that's a fun thing. So dwarves with a V, that comes from Tolkien. All right. Anyways, so let's take a look at the dwarf swords. Where are they at in Lord of the Rings? We see them in The Hobbit. Don't see them here. And you know what? I'm okay with that. Very on theme, I think, because you got to think that dwarves, they're in the mines, right? They're using things like pickaxes, hammers, they're swinging around things that are top heavy, right? Where swords are not top heavy. All the weight is typically concentrated closer to the hand. It's almost like the reverse of a pick, the reverse of an axe, the reverse of a hammer, right? So it makes sense that if dwarves are constantly using, things like picks, hammers, that they want to take something that has that same sort of weight and feel. And so I know obviously dwarves are short, and so using a shorter weapon, might compound that issue, right? But these are stout, heavily armored troops. They're used to fighting people heavily in armor. Axes are great for that, great for the damage potential. These are items they're familiar with. They're familiar with that weight. And so I think it's very on theme, looks great, total score, 10 out of 10 for flavor. And that is why this is my favorite non-sword. All right. Let's take a look at the high elf sword, right? Moving right along. Functionality wise, we actually see a couple different swords like this in history, okay? Where you have the length of the blade and the length of the hilt almost identical in length. You see this with some Japanese swords, the nagamaki. That one tends to be a single, almost like a D-shaped curve. And so some people have said that, oh yeah, this is the nagamaki from Japan. I actually think it looks more like if you look at the panabas from traditional Filipino weapons, that one does have a little bit more of an S-shaped curve, which reminds me more of this. But either way, right, whether you're looking at the panabas or the nagamaki, this style weapon is very historically plausible or accurate in that sense. Where there's not a whole lot of hand protection, and so you might be like, oh, that's not very functional, right? But it's like that's how it was in history, right? The Nagamaki doesn't have a whole lot of hand protection. The Panabis doesn't have any hand protection. It just affects how you use the weapon. So functionality wise, totally fine, right? 5 out of 5. Now. And man, this is going to be a beastly cutter for sure. Now, if you look at the detailing here, oh man, I mean, just look at the hilt, right? You have all this intricate detail with this leaf pattern. Man, looks incredible. Oh man, this is a gorgeous sword. As far as aesthetics go, you look at this and it almost looks otherworldly. It looks very like, you look at it and you're like, yeah, that's an elf sword, right? 5 out of 5 for aesthetics. Man, 10 out of 10 overall. That is why this is my favorite sword. That's why. Let's take a look at Elrond's sword. You actually see Liv Tyler as Arwen use it as well. Looks like they both use this in the movie. And this, again, kind of reminds me of some Filipino weapons where you have these sort of like either short sword, long knives, single-edged, curved or recurved, right? You kind of see this sort of recurve or curve style in some Yatagans. You see it with some of the Filipino weapons. And again, with some of those, they don't have a whole lot of hand protection. So you might think like, oh, no, that's a detriment. But, that's how some of these were historically. So functionality-wise, like that's not an issue at all, right? So 5 out of 5 when it comes to functionality. Like this is going to be, it's a short sword, quick, light. It'll do some damage there. Now, will these little like thorn things that stick out, will they actually catch a blade? Maybe, again, but like you don't need those for it to be perfectly functional, right? And aesthetically, if you look at the aesthetics of it, it reminds me a little bit of like, if you look at like the thorns of a rose or something like that, it does have this like flowery pattern. So aesthetically, it fits really well. You have this like etching down the blade. You have this beautiful pommel cap. I mean, it looks incredible, looks beautiful, right? So aesthetically, this is, of course, going to get five swords, right? So total score, 10 out of 10. And that's why this is my favorite sword. All right, let's take a look at Gandalf's sword. Now, this one is interesting, right? Because, again, if you look at the length and proportions, like, oh, yeah, this is a longsword, right? So all the same longsword stuff applies. However, this was slightly differently because this is a longsword with a leaf blade shape. That it's slightly different. In fact, in history, I don't know if you actually see any long swords with these proportions. You see them anciently with short swords, but with a long sword, it's a little different. Now, if you take that shape, does it become less effective when you put it in two-handed version? No, like the functionality, like this is going to be a beastly cutter, and if you thrust someone with this, it's gonna create a gaping wound. This is gonna do some serious damage. Now, so functionality wise, there's nothing wrong with this shape, right? It's interesting to me, like taking a look at it, I was like, oh yeah, why don't you really see long swords with this? And that I don't really have a good answer for because, functionality wise, this is going to work just fine. Like this is going to be a beast of a cutter. So 5 out of 5 for functionality. Now let's take a look at the aesthetics, right? Again, this blade has some curves, and I love curves. You have, take a look at this, right? Like it has that beautiful iconic shape. It has some extra detailing that's, closer to the guard here, right? And it's just, wow, look at that. And then you have your fuller. And then if you look at the cross piece, you look at the cross guard here, right? Like look at all the dimension to this. And then on top of that, you have like these little like detailing carvings here. You have like this beautiful inset gem. You have a beautiful colored, like leather grip here, with like detailing and texture, and wow. And then you have the extended pommel here, right? So you get that contrast of like metal and leather, and it's just, and I really do like swords where it's like one hand, for whatever reason, one hand's on leather, one hand's, I don't know, right? I like it. Okay, it's beautiful, it looks great, wow. And the thing is like you don't really see anything else like it, and it is a perfect combination of Sting and Glamdring, where they have that overall same shape, and they're supposed to be from that same place, so it makes sense that they have that consistency in the way that they look. So total score, 10 out of 10. That is why, guys, this is my favorite sword. That is why this is my favorite sword. Let's take a look at Sting now. We were just talking about how this blade shape is like historically common anciently, right? Like you have short swords with this blade shape. Every once in a while you have like a leaf shaped blade in a gladius, but this looks very much to me like if you look at a Xiphos, the Xiphoses look just like this. The only difference is a lot of Xiphos don't have this sort of like pear shaped like end cap here. They typically just are like shaved off there, so they're like kind of like round, but then it looks like, I don't know, you could like pound it with a hammer or something. I don't know, but I actually prefer, if I'm being honest, I prefer this shape here. So functionality, this is going to be exactly the same as like a historical piece, the Xyphos, right? Functionality, 5 out of 5, right? This is a profile that has been used historically, and it works, right? It works great. Overall aesthetic, again, man, you have all this detail on the grip, you have detail etching down the blade, you have detailing on the guard, you have that like nice little end cap there. Man, it looks beautiful. Again, very consistent with Gandalf's sword. So in that sense, right? Oh man, the aesthetic is on point. So overall, 10 out of 10, and that is why this is my favorite sword. Now let's take a look at the Urkai sword. Man, changing gears, very, very different looking sword, right? You look at it functionality wise, this is going to be a cleaver, right? And again, you don't have to make this like super thick metal for this to be effective, right? You think about machetes, it has like a very machete shaped blade, which that profile is going to be fine. It's all going to be determined on how thick it is. But for like just cleaving, hacking, smashing, this is going to work great. And the thing is with those types of like cutting, hacking swords, it's like, okay, well, what do you do when you come into contact with armor? Because it's like, you're not like, if we're being realistic, you're not going to cut through plate armor. You're not cutting through mail armor, right? That stuff, like very rarely will that something like that happen. However, you can pierce mail armor, right? Like, and that like, so if you just have a primarily cleaving weapon, you don't really, it's like, this is a way for you can thrust all with like a slash, right? So again, it fits very well with what they're doing, and functionality wise, this would be yeah, rough. And the thing is that you look at it again, it's like, okay, we don't have any hand protection, but again, you think about it in conjunction, the Urkai have the shield, so you don't need as much hand protection. Also wearing gauntlets, like, so functionality, this is gonna be fine. 5 out of 5. This is gonna do some damage. Yeah, that's, even though it's a completely different style sword, like the functionality, this will work fine. And then you might think like aesthetic, like, okay, that does not look nearly as nice as some of the other swords that we're just looking at, right? And that could be personal preference. However, if you're looking at just the idea of like these weapons, right? And if you look at weapons historically, the weapons will tell you a lot about who is using them, right? What was their level of technology? What was their fighting style? You can determine a lot by looking at a lot about their culture by looking at their weapons, right? And these weapons tell a story about orc culture, right? Which is like, it's aggressive, right? It's utilitarian. We're mass producing these, and we're very offense driven, right? And so, and from that sense, the aesthetics do tell a story really well. They fit with the culture really well, and that is why this actually gets a 5 for aesthetics, which brings this to a total of a 10 out of 10, and that is why this is my favorite sword. In conclusion, everybody, there is a reason that the Lord of the Rings trilogy set the standard. Okay, yes. Were we joking a little bit about saying everything's a 10 out of 10? No, we weren't, because they were just that dang good, right? Why is Lord of the Rings so good? It has great source material, and the people who made the movie showed respect to that source material. And the designs that were created were beautiful, they were unique, they were iconic, they were functional, right? And yeah, so basically, Lord of the Rings gets, drumroll, 10 out of 10. And that is why it is my favorite trilogy. Okay, it's just that dang good. All right, now, you guys, if you want to go trap your friends and family just as you two have been trapped, and spread the good news that is the Lord of the Rings, look no further than the description. Get your PowerPoint and go have a great time at PowerPoint night tonight, or whenever you do it. All right, goodbye.